The must-draft players of the last 10 rounds of fantasy football drafts. Who are they and why should you draft them? How will they supercharge your roster to give you the best chance to win your fantasy football league? That is what we're going to talk about on this edition of the show. And Shawn, we are doing it in the $125 FFPC Best Ball Tournament. We have our opening 10 picks done with Jamar Chase, Kyron Williams, Kyle Pitts, DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs, James Conner, Xavier Worthy, Jamison Williams, TJ Hawkinson, and Caleb Williams. I was going to ask you, Shawn, if Cole Kmet came back after, maybe that first preseason game not giving him some of the publicity that he may have wanted to get or people wanted to see from him, but he doesn't go, so he doesn't come back. That conversation doesn't need to happen. We're going to talk about the players people should draft, and our goal is to get them onto this roster to help us win this tournament. So we're about to be back on the clock, Shawn. We have a lot of flexibility now that we've got that first quarterback. How are you feeling, and which direction would you like to go as we are now on the clock?
Colm, Kirk Cousins is here. He will probably not be here much longer. It's interesting because in this format, he's going not that long after the group with Tua, Goff, and Trevor Lawrence. He obviously is the fit there with Kyle Pitts. We could wait on that and try and take someone like a Justin Fields later. I don't know that Chubb with TJ Hawkinson is the best way to maximize our
the one thing I would pitch for Chubb is that he has, you now have Williams and Connor to work through those early weeks. We don't normally have as much running back firepower would be the reason I would do it. The Kirk Cousins pick could go at any point, as we mentioned in the earlier part, but the London drafter is also after us, so if it was somebody trying to stack him, he may get back. I'm good if you want to go with Cousins, but I would still risk it for Chubb. Shawn does it.
And you mentioned that the London drafter was on that side. We do have one team here without a QB.
That's the one. Trevor Lawrence is still there, though, and Justin Herbert kind of goes in this range.
I would think that Lawrence would be the original target for that roster. If you're looking at how do you get ADP value, that might be a team that is looking to target a Geno Smith, as they have two Seahawks there. So those are possibilities that, I think there's a pretty good chance that we'll get one of these QBs to come back. We were in a little bit of a dead spot there in terms of other running back options, which is the reason that I felt comfortable making that pick for Chubb. We'll see if we're able to withstand the early weeks, because just going with 18 instead of 20 is going to be a big deal. Yep. We're going to have to nail the rest of these selections if we want to make it work. Colm, Jerry Jeudy, Dontavian Wicks, both interesting receiver names as we work back into this next round.
I don't want to alarm you, Shawn. I believe this is the second team that we've drafted with those two players, Hawkinson and Chubb, on it. I think
we like those guys. I mean, we're willing to take the risk. There are very significant trade-offs, though.
I guess that's a good conversation to have at this point. Like, we have seen a flat zone where at this point and Trevor Lawrence did go to that draft that you mentioned. There's 9 picks in this round. 5 of those, six. My counting is not great today. Now up to 7 through 10 have been running backs, 2 tight ends, another running back in Austin Eckler goes off the board, and then Trevor Lawrence as well. I think that Nick Chubb and Hawkinson, they're picks that I'm making with the intent of trying to win the whole thing. So you obviously need to advance, and that is a key part. But I also want those particular profile of players who I think can have just absolutely league-wrecking weeks when it gets to the later stage of the season and the end of the season. But you do need to have that situation where you can manage it. And being able to have a Nick Chubb as a luxury pick, the same as having a TJ Hawkinson, is definitely what I would consider a luxury pick. But I think they're luxury picks that can pay off in massive, massive ways. They could also turn out to be absolutely nothing, and they could either re-aggravate injuries or not be 100% at any point this season. So that is something to definitely bear in mind. And the other part of it, Shawn, I did mention this earlier as well, with DJ Moore and leaning in some situations to picking players that I haven't been picking as much this offseason. One of those is Kyron Williams, which I mentioned to you that I don't know if I've drafted him in a solo draft at all this season. You mentioned that maybe the fear of his job security might be over exaggerated. It's not necessarily that I'm in that camp. Mine is more, we talked about the benefit of Chris Olave or Drake London at that pick spot as well. More so that I'm going for one of them or hoping that I get a Trey McBride. I'm kind of hoping that Kyron Williams is gone before I make my selection. So it's not that I think that he's going to lose out in that job scenario. But he is somebody that I haven't been drafting a lot, but DJ Moore fits into that category. A couple of other players that I've been kind of DeAndre Swift, I drafted in the draft with Zachary Kruger today, which isn't a player that I've been drafting myself. I've been kind of going to the Roshan Johnson area a lot more, maybe even Khalil Herbert. And, I think it's also important to try and balance that out. Is that something that you try and do throughout your drafts? Or are you looking for that exposure in drafts with co-managers where you can say, okay, I'm going to take it this time because that person mentioned them? Are you trying to kind of diversify when players fall below ADP or just to try and balance it out? I tend to be much more heavily sided on the players that I just want to draft rather than trying to balance it too much.
Yeah, I think that the thing that you can do when you draft with co-managers is lean into that humility a little bit more. And if there are players where we've talked about my priority targets list and how I like to divide that out between priority targets, and the guys that you select when they fall. And those when they fall players, if they're actually targets or priority targets for your co-manager, then you can go ahead and take them, at ADP. They don't necessarily have to be fallers in the same way. That allows you to obviously do multiple things. You get the exposure, you lean on your co-manager for some insight. Obviously, you are a good partner in the draft, all of those types of things. Colm, we are back up in round 12. Kirk Cousins has come to us. That seems like a fairly straightforward pick. Is that how you're looking at this one?
Yeah, and I'm really glad that there's, sometimes when you get like, oh, I said something 12 picks ago and it might turn out, and then, you get sniped one pick before. But to take Chubb and then to get Cousins on the way back, I think is really nice there. Some of the wide receivers that you did mention as well earlier, Jerry Jeudy, Wicks, as two of those particular ones. Again, I would be hopeful that some of them might sneak their way back to us here in that following round. But to get a second quarterback in Cousins, who I think that shows again. So we talk about this, Shawn, sometimes with our drafts, and sometimes then it's hard to get it to play out. I've kind of mentioned that when you're drafting at the turn, it's harder to get those values. That's a prime example of it, where we could, kick Cousins another round and hope that he comes back, and it does work out for us on that occasion. So to get him as the second quarterback there gives us massive amount of wiggle room and flexibility as to what we want to do as the draft progresses here. We do miss out with Wicks going 2 picks after our selection, and that can happen with preseason highlights. Can boost ADP quite quickly. It might just take, it takes one person to really like what they see to move somebody up their board or to take them a little bit earlier. We do see not as much, but we'll see some of the. I thought that Cole Kmet, there might have been some effect on his ADP. Didn't really happen. I was driving back Shawn car journey on Saturday, and I was doing some slow drafts with Conor O'Driscoll. He did send me a very funny message where my assumption was that Cole Kmet's season was over, but it was just that he didn't play all the snaps that you would prefer. But people will overreact, and Conor was doing it in jest, but it was like I was like pulled into a petrol station or a garage, as you may call it, and I was like, oh my goodness, what has happened to Cole Kmet? And he was like, oh, nothing really. But all the preseason notes, certain player isn't playing in preseason because he's a guaranteed starter. Somebody else plays 4 snaps because they know the offense, and people want to react that he's his career's over. So these things we have to digest over the coming weeks, Shawn. We will be moving back into round 13, but we have 2 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 2 tight ends, and 5 receivers. I'm kind of starting to feel quite comfortable with the structure that we're putting together here. Those opening rounds where you have 2 running backs through 6 can change the direction that you're going in. But I think we're in quite a nice position here. And Jerry Jeudy, if he comes back, would be my preferred option here. Interestingly, Shawn, Jerry Jeudy, not a player that some of our co-managers are looking to draft. But I'm quite excited about him, and I think he could be the league winning pick here in the 13th round if we get him. Any other targets? Sonata's on the list here. Somebody again who, we're kind of waiting to see what fully happens with him in that offense in Washington, but you have to buy him now if you want to have him on the roster. Somebody I've mentioned, Shawn, the amount of my conversations with listeners that revolve around one tight end that plays in Denver through our ongoing drafts and conversations that we've had around Greg Dulcich are always a lot of fun, but he is getting some more hype and moving up boards a little bit. Who, if Jerry Jeudy goes here, would be one of your preferred targets?
If Jeudy goes, you can look at Jalen Polk, perhaps get the number one receiver for the Patriots. And I'm pretty comfortable just getting one more receiver with the guys that we have. So that's something to consider as well. If we have some late round options, we could wait at that position. One of the things that I do want to do, and I think is very possible right now, is to get a ton of running back firepower. That helps to balance out the
Chubb
pick. And then you can also look to do a little bit of that at tight end. Now, the tight ends are in such demand in this format that it becomes a little bit more difficult to do. And yet there are some names as we get through these next couple of rounds. Colm, if you could just make multiple picks in every round, obviously you would be fine. But I think that we just lost Jeudy one pick ahead of us there.
That was a pretty crushing one to see come up on the board. So that does give us, Shawn, we're looking at potentially Polk there. There is some running backs. The running back I was looking at was Algier. He went. You do have Jaleel McLaughlin as another running back option. Josh Downs, Shawn, although he has, his injury, I wouldn't be against adding him onto this roster if you wanted to take him, because I know we're worried about the zeros at the start of the season, but with the wide receivers that we have, we maybe can balance him through it as well if you want to go that way. Who's your pitch? I'm going to give you 24 seconds on some of the times that be left on my clock. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think that Josh Downs is draftable. Hopefully that will change. Hopefully we're going to get really positive reports on him, but it's just not an offense that is set up to support multiple receivers. The prices for all of those guys are tricky. It really looks like it's going to be the Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor show running the ball. I don't think we can add a third player who won't be ready for week one. Now, maybe that will change with him. He's in a little bit of a race for the opening week, but you lose all of the momentum that you were developing there. The Indianapolis Colts passing offense, I think, is still one that is developmental. And so any lost reps, any lost rapport, any necessity for Richardson to develop a better connection with a Michael Pittman, whom you would kind of expect to be the target hog, or an A.D. Mitchell, who is the best ball fit, vertical, deep shot guy, could score a handful of long touchdowns. I think that cuts against Josh Downs. I really like him as a player. We always like to reference it because people did really object to the comparisons between Zay Flowers and Josh Downs last year. I do think those guys are similar players, but they're just in wildly, wildly different circumstances.
Yeah, and it is unfortunate. Hopefully, obviously the circumstance of the offense mightn't change, but hopefully his injury outlook is more positive than negative, obviously, moving forward. A player, Shawn, I was going to mention, but he does go off the board 2 picks later because we did take Kirk Cousins, Darnell Mooney now, obviously, with the Falcons, and we did get the unfortunate news that Rondale Moore had a significant injury that's going to cause him to miss the season. So he could have been somebody who could have fitted in at wide receiver, but I do like the Polk pick. People listening to the show, Shawn, over the last week or so, we may become Jalen Polk truthers at this time. Is that what's going to happen? Because we obviously talked about him on that show. We draft him here. The offense, obviously, for the Patriots, I think that's a big one of those decisions where, in 4 weeks' time or 6 weeks' time, a bit like the Denver Broncos, who we've been quite heavy. Well, I'll speak for myself. I've been quite heavily in on. The outlook could be just dramatically different in a positive perspective and that's not been priced into ADP. Do you think that's the way we look at the Patriots? I know you're talking about Anthony Richardson, from the passing perspective, but either quarterback for the Patriots leading to a much more productive passing offense?
I think so. I mean, Jacoby Brissett is a starting caliber quarterback, now a low-end starter, but a starting quarterback.
Like, there's a chance that if people are not in on the Patriots, and they could be, when we talk sometimes about the Carolina Panthers, there could be the feeling there that the Patriots and the Panthers are just like the two worst offenses by far in the NFL.
I think you've got to throw in the Tennessee Titans, but
Titans fans out there giving out now, Shawn. Throw them under the bus.
No, I mean, the Titans offense was fun because it looks like it's going to run through Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, which is smart. And so I did like what I saw from them in preseason week 1. The situation there with the Patriots is that there is some upside in that Brissett can play, and that Drake May is a little bit of a black box, right? If he came out and looked like Will Levis, we wouldn't be surprised. If he came out and looked like a somewhat, not the peak version of Josh Allen, but someone who was halfway there, I don't think that we would be surprised. And that would be exciting. When you're looking at Jalen Polk, it's really this combination of 3 things. The potential volume, because their receiving core is basically non-existent. The humility element of player evaluation, where sometimes guys just come and dramatically outperform their prospect profile. That's going to be very much enhanced when a team has spent a pick on somebody like they did. And then you have this element where Polk makes these highlight plays, which, again, especially when you are very predisposed to see it positively because you reached for him in the reality draft, you're going to love that. And so he's going to be a focal point of what they do offensively. Now, whether he can hold up to that, there are questions there. He struggled some even as the second fiddle to Rome Odunze in college. And yet just the confluence of different exciting elements there, especially at that price too. I mean, you're getting in this format a good price on Jalen Polk. Colm, we are back up now in round 14. And
is it time to pull the trigger, Shawn?
Well, I'm going to make the case for Mike Gesicki.
Okay.
We're in a little bit of a running back dead zone here to where I think we can push these guys through into round 15. And getting Gesicki doesn't solve all the problems, but at least gets us another tight end, and then we can continue to build off that as we go forward.
Well, the trigger pick I was talking about was Justin Fields. You don't want to take him first? Do you want him? I think Gesicki gets back to you.
So Colm wants Justin Fields. Again, we're going to win this thing. So Caleb Williams, Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, a really fun QB group there that wasn't particularly expensive. Again, Caleb Williams, QB 15. I prefer our QB group to any other group in this draft as a result of being able to make that pick. I think the quarterbacks complement each other in the right ways to create the upside. Colm, again, we now have 3 guys
quarterback
who may not be playing.
This was a weird quarterback draft because we seen quarterbacks go very early, but then we seen a lot of guys fall. Like Trevor Lawrence just fell in this draft. It eventually went at the 11, 10. But yeah, I like the 3 that we have paired together. They're extremely exciting. And again, Shawn, we could be in a situation where, like, for the majority of the season, we have Fields on the bench, Hawkinson on the bench, and also Nick Chubb. And that would be obviously very bad for this roster and would mean that we wouldn't win the contest. But again, it's a tournament winning play. He's obviously moved up quite a bit in ADP from where he was a couple of weeks ago, but still, I think as a QB3 in this lineup is very appetizing at that point. Now, Shawn is going to be able to give out to me if Mike Gesicki doesn't get back through. The other tight end that's here kind of in an ADP range would be Sinat. So it depends if people jump the queue for tight end need, which will be very interesting here for us over these next couple of picks. The drafter in spot 1 only has the 1 tight end, Chubb, so we could see that as a place where we could miss out. And Shawn, I'm hoping that he takes the Sinot pick because he is a Jaden Daniels drafter, and he may want to go for the correlation play there. It is an area where you can certainly start to get a little bit tricky and short at tight end for those additional spots, but there is some potentially athletic options to move. And Shawn, we also have the Greg Dulcich Express on the way as well, if you want to go in that direction. Throughout the rest of the team, though, we have talked about the advantage of having 4 quarterbacks in this particular format. I think the 3 guys we have worked out perfect in that 6-round range where we get Williams in the 10th, Cousins in the 12th, and then Fields in the 14th. I would probably be comfortable with that. We'll see what happens as we move forward here. We do have the ability to obviously take those advantages. I think 2 additional tight ends would be really nice in this roster, but something that I found in some of these particular formats recently, when you're flipping back and forth between them, is, the roster construction. I find at times where I think I would rather have 1 less wide receiver, 1 more running back, and with some of those positions, when you do allocate the spaces, it can be a little bit tricky depending on what's available in those last couple of rounds. I think, though, that we can really take this in any direction. How do you feel about the quarterbacks? Would you want to give it a third? I'm not talking about an outstanding fall in value, but just strategically. And obviously, we have the concern with Hawkinson and Chubb. We probably want to focus on those positions as well.
Right. So we have the 3 QBs, which the Best Ball Tournament strategy guide does mildly recommend, especially when we have set it up like this, where we don't have one of the early QBs. That helps to complement the overall build. Now, we do get Senate going at the 1501 to the Jaden Daniels drafter. That was somewhat expected. The problem, again, with taking Justin Fields is not so much that Fields isn't a good pick there. The problem is that there are then cascading issues of we can only take either a tight end or a running back in this next round, and really we need both. There are going to be some good running backs on the board, some good tight ends on the board. When we get back to rounds 19 and 20, that's less the case. Possibly you would be able to use the last round picks on a QB if you wanted to get to that third one. Possibly not. So we'll have to keep in mind who the best picks are for the final couple of rounds, and hopefully we get some fallers in 19 and 20, because if you can make those rounds actually matter, then your team ends up being a lot better. And again, it's especially important when we've taken the 2 zeros in Chubb and TJ Hawkinson. Colm, one of the things that we're seeing right here is that Marshawn Lloyd, Kamani Vidal, Tyrone Tracy, Kendre Miller, all of those guys are going to get back to our pick in round 15, minus potentially whoever goes here at the 15-5. But I think that we're probably stuck taking a tight end.
Yeah, well, Mike Gesicki is 1 pick away from getting back to us. He would be the tight end preference that I would go for if you want to go tight end. The one thing just to highlight, and it's not as problematic when it's the 3rd tight end, but Kyle Pitts is also a week 12 bye, which would link in with Mike Gesicki, but I'm okay with taking him at this particular point. The other player, Shawn, I would imagine was a priority target for you. Bucky Irvine did go 1 pick before that, so that would have been a tougher conversation, I think, to steer you on Gesicki versus Irvine. But do you want to prioritize one of those running backs? I think that the tight end play makes sense here, unless you want to take Lloyd, who's obviously with his hamstring issues is way beyond his regular ADP.
Yeah, I was thinking that this might be a good spot to take Braelon Allen. He was the most impressive running back in the preseason in week 1. I don't think that he will make it back to us in round 16 in a team that doesn't have Hall. This is probably the way to get the most contention upside.
You're on the clock, Shawn. I've pushed a few picks, so I'll let you do that one. I would have went Gesicki there after we were able to push him around after. So if we can push him 2 rounds after, Shawn, Gesicki will definitely be the pick.
Well, one of the issues here is that you did mention that week 12 bye. I think not knowing what the scoop with Hawkinson is going to be, I would really prefer those tight ends all be different. And so that was a great note that you had. When we look at the guys in our queue, Mike Gesicki and Juwan Johnson, both are week 12.
Who's not week 12, Shawn?
Greg Dulcich. And so I know that gets Colm super fired up. The possibility that he might finally get to
Shawn
click Greg Dulcich when we are together. But the other thing there is that I think Tucker Kraft and Michael Mayer are excellent picks.
Yeah.
And then Theo Johnson, also a good pick. None of those tight ends are week 12 buys. Again, at a certain point, the buy is going to be it's certainly a secondary consideration. But when we had so many running backs that we still really liked, I mean, Tyrone Tracy was the other guy that was really hard to pass on there. You mentioned that Devin Singletary went one pick before us when we ended up clicking Caleb Williams. I guess I don't really have Singletary as a consideration anymore. Tyrone Tracy has looked too good. He was one of those guys that we recommended as a must draft in Dynasty. The fact that he has bypassed Eric Gray, and I mean, he's the guy who could unlock that offense at running back. I am pretty excited about possibly taking him in this next round. Greg Dulcich, middle of 16. I know that one is going to be tricky.
Well, it's going to be hard to pass up somebody who we talked about 2 rounds earlier. Our only out on that, if Gesicki makes it back, is going to be the bye week. But I think it's a good conversation for people to, just draft strategy wise. We talked about Gesicki. I pushed the Fields pick, and then Gesicki comes back and we skip him because of the other additional roster requirements and the overall draft process, that taking the third quarterback there changes the dynamic of what you need to do. And then small things like the week 12, for example, can switch things up as well. So I think when we talk about Gesicki and the possibility that he gets back, the bye week issue with him and Dulcich, I think can split hairs there, and obviously Shawn, just for the bet equity, if we get Dulcich back, I think we have to take him. People will be furious if we don't. But you mentioned I'll be happy if I get to click, and you did add the phrase after it, when we are together, because that button has been getting clicked when I'm drafting on my own. So we are in a situation here.
You were not thrown off by the fact that Lucas Krull had like 17,000 targets in a couple series there with Bo Nix.
No.
Okay.
I cannot be thrown off, Shawn. I mentioned at the start of this about being too locked in on players. You have to give me, when he is not on injured reserve, I will be on Greg Dulcich. The issue is that he spends most of his life on injured reserve. So we'll see if he can stay healthy. But yeah, about 6 picks away, we could even, Shawn, have 2 tight end options. Tucker Kraft is interesting as well. We had actually a good few conversations about Kraft versus Musgrave earlier this offseason. And one of the concerns was, the recovery for Kraft and how he would factor into things, potentially missing, kind of in a similar situation potentially to what we're talking about with TJ Hawkinson. It looks like that won't be the case. And he obviously, just athletically, the profile that he offers is spectacular in that offense, where I think that you could see 2 tight ends out there on some occasions. So, or not some, but a lot of occasions. So Kraft is interesting. Michael Mayer is somebody we've talked about on those rosters where you do not get yourself Brock Bowers. And the other part of that is as well, I do think that's an offense that might be 2 tight end related as well with the Las Vegas Raiders. Mike Gesicki does go, Shawn. The breath holding has now commenced for the possibility of Greg Dulcich coming back. The other player that's here, because we've talked a little bit about our wide receiver core, Wan'Dale Robinson, I know is often a priority target, Shawn, for both of us and yourself, I believe, in particular. So he is in this range. Are you going to try and pitch Robinson versus Dulcich here for me?
No, I think we're done at the wide receiver position. We have too many needs at running back and tight end. Colby Parkinson goes 1 pick ahead of us. Colm, the Denver Broncos looked pretty good in the passing offense this last week. Our running back targets will hopefully last another round. We're going to do it. We're making the plunge.
Shawn didn't even let me click the button. I can't believe that. I only make Shawn click the button when it's players that I don't want to draft, and Shawn's clicked the button, but I'll just pretend that I did it as well. We get him. I do think like when you're looking at the player profiles in this range and players who can ascend up, he fits the mold for me, and I do think that, I know you mentioned Kroll. I think there's a very clear pathway to being the tight end one in that offense for Dulcich. But that gets us to our third tight end. We're clear across bye weeks, which is nice now. If it's a situation, Shawn, where we get Hawkinson healthy after their bye, I think it might be another couple of weeks, but that feels like a reasonable range. Bye week 6, get him to week 7, could start to be factored into things even at that point. I would take that as a massive win for this roster with a third tight end, because I think Dulcich can start to vault his way into usable weeks as well in this lineup. So we currently, as you mentioned, at the wide receiver position, we do just have the 6 names. You're comfortable. It's Chase, Brown, Diggs, Worthy, Williams, and Polk. I wouldn't be against adding a 7th name to that. We will have our remaining 3 or 4 selections coming up. How are you looking at playing it? Is it mainly through the running back position the rest of the way, or adding a 4th tight end as well?
Yeah, 4th tight end. You can add a 5th tight end in this format. I think that is something we have to consider, given how little we've really still spent on it outside of Kyle Pitts. In the final round, you have names like Troy Franklin. After all of the concern with where he played this last week, you've got that sort of escape hatch with him in round 20 if you feel like you want to balance a little bit more at that point. I think with just having essentially Kyron Williams, James Conner, and Braelon Allen, that we have multiple running back picks to try and execute over these next couple of rounds.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. So we are going to work our way through that. We are 5 picks away. I do like a lot of these late round options. The problem is a bit like when I know I talk about this about the wide receiver position, that it's like a thin path to your targets. But I do think that there's kind of a thin path to these running back targets that we have, but there is also, rounds between them. It's not a case that they're all going back-to-back picks. So we might get fortunate and be able to pick up a couple of them. Estime here is falling a little bit past his ADP, not too much, but in that range. As Hayden Hurst goes off the board, we are seeing Wandell, who we mentioned, fall that a little bit. But Shawn, Shipley is somebody who we talked probably a lot more about around draft season in terms of rookie drafts, somebody that you have talked about. How's your feelings as the course of the offseason has gone on? Are you still having him as a priority target here in these late rounds for your rosters?
Yeah, it was great to see him catch that touchdown pass. I don't know that he looked like anything special as a runner when he was out there, and yet you have the athleticism, you've got decent size, that receiving ability, even if it's not used in the Eagles offense the way it might be in a different offense. I mean, they've already kind of reminded us with getting him a touchdown reception, how that could work out. His upside in the case of a Saquon Barkley injury is absolutely huge. One of the things as well, we've taken and there Tucker Kraft goes, we've taken the contingent play off of Breece Hall. We could potentially do that off of, and column 1 pick ahead of us, Audric Estime goes. That would have been a fun one to click. I think that leaves us with Will Shipley as the very obvious play. Yeah. We've talked a bunch about how Barkley is overvalued pretty substantially, and yet getting the contingent bet off of him as well, when they're probably a standalone value for Will Shipley, that's probably the direction we should go here.
Well, it's definitely the direction that we should go. The question that I was going to lean to then is we have taken Allen and Shipley. And one of the reasons, we're concerned about the running back room is the health, obviously, of Nick Chubb. Those two guys, and we take Allen 2 rounds ahead of Shipley. What's your kind of feeling at this particular juncture of the offseason in terms of standalone value for people, wondering week 1 through week 4? Do those guys offer standalone value, or is it just a case that a lot of that is contingency based in terms of, the player in front of them needs to miss time?
I think Braelon Allen has plenty of standalone value. That's one of the reasons why we went ahead and make sure we locked him in. The Jets, in that Aaron Rodgers, Nathaniel Hackett offense, are going to almost certainly create value for two running backs. That's something that we have gotten from them pretty consistently.
Yeah.
Now, even when you had Aaron Jones previously, there is a talent gulf between Hall and Jones. Colm, there is more incentive to make sure that Hall is getting enough touches. And yet, as good as Allen has looked with the ability to keep Hall healthy, with as RB-centric as that team could be outside of passes to Garrett Wilson, yeah, standalone value seems like the least of it with Braelon Allen at this point. I guess it's not as clear for Will Shipley because you do still have Kenneth Gainwell in the mix. But one of the things that was exciting about how the Eagles played that is that they did have Gainwell playing in the game, which suggested basically no moat for him in terms of anything they're trying to do to keep him healthy. And at the same time, Shipley playing so close to him, that looks like a situation where Shipley could be the second running back. But there's probably a little bit of a committee element behind Barkley. I think that the legitimate amount of standalone value you have in the first month from Shipley, probably not a ton. I think what you're hoping for is standalone value as the season progresses.
That all feels very fair and within the range of outcomes. But he's just a player that, again, we've talked about quite a bit, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, maybe a little bit longer, and we haven't talked as much about. So I think it's interesting. The other thing I do think is, when you're drafting on these sites and the websites will give, projected scores beside players. I always he's somebody, I believe it's kind of in the high 30s to 40 range in terms on the FFPC, what it's given allocated as season long total points. So I think people are maybe less likely to click on that name when they see, oh, this player's, not expected to do a whole pile. But I think when you factor in everything Shawn has said there, there's a lot more to the profile and the players than just that. So we are up against Shawn in one pick. I think we have a few interesting options. We'll probably continue to try and push the tight end position, as we mentioned, but there is a couple of running backs here, and we're getting into the zero RB round. So I'm sure people are very late running backs rather than zero RB rounds, but I'm sure the listeners are waiting and on these words with a lot of intrigue as Shawn talks through some of the running backs that we need to finish out this roster. So some of the names in the queue, Shawn, at the moment at the running back position, Royce Freeman, Garendo, Dylan Lobby, Jordan Mason, Justice Hill. We are on the clock. How do you want to play it? Do you want to play it by preferred player? Do you want to play it by ADP? I know we talk about it this range of the draft. ADP really doesn't matter as much. There's 3 selections to go. We can take them in whatever order you prefer.
Well, we've had 34 tight ends go, and yet the best sort of backup or committee tight end by a huge margin would seem to be Michael Mayer. So I think that we want to lock him in.
Okay,
and
I'm good with that. Yeah.
You've got a little bit of that contingent value with Bowers. Obviously, we have so much Bowers. We hope that never comes into play. But they're going to run a ton of 2 tight end sets. Mayer may be the best target they have outside of Devontae Adams and Bowers. Now, Colm, both of those guys have had plenty of puff pieces written about them this offseason. The people covering the Raiders are enthusiastic about what the pieces are. The question then is, who is the quarterback? How well does that person play? And then how does it manifest? I mean, still the big problem is that when you have guys like Adams and Bowers out there at 1-2, unless you have a very prolific passing offense, there won't be a lot left. But Mayer is just too big of a talent to let go any deeper in this particular draft. I love getting him as the tight end 4. I think he's got to be a pretty big target for you as you're trying to figure out, how do I get tight ends without making selections like, we have Hunter Henry, Isaiah Likely, Chig Okonkwo, and Cade Otton go in rounds 12 and 13.
By ADP, though, this is a good, like, for people listening. By ADP, Shawn, he's generally going as the tight end 39 in the late 19th round. So he is a player you can get in every single draft if you want. And realistically, if you take him there in the 18th, you get him every single time.
You're going to usually get him. And somebody who shows up even later is Jatavian Sanders, and he went at the 17-10 in this particular draft. But yeah, I mean, Mayer gives you that out. My thought is just that there's almost nothing separating the tight ends between rounds 12 and rounds 18. The very next pick after ours was Dawson Knox. He's in a similar situation to Mayer, but in a more prolific offense. You have Theo Johnson picked 3 picks ahead of us. He could be the tight end 1 for New York. I strongly prefer to try and get the non-stars in that range as opposed to paying up for them.
Yeah. So we did pass Shawn on the running backs. Jordan Mason, who I mentioned, Justice Hill is another name. They both have gone in that late 18th. Hill is somebody who could be interesting for some early season value, but I think it's obviously going to be a little bit capped there, or a lot capped with the situation in Baltimore. But as they work some of the running backs back from injury, which will cap his mid-season, late season opportunities, I do think there's some, in a team, if you were desperate need of early season points, he could fit the mold there. But we do have still the same name, Shawn, that I mentioned before. You've 3 names here that we're probably hoping to get in Laube, Garendo, and Royce Freeman. Freeman's an interesting one because we haven't talked about him, and he's obviously a way down the draft boards. But that Dallas situation, it looks exploitable if a running back is actually somewhat good. What's the case here for Freeman, as he's now into the veteran territory of his career?
Well, at different times in camp, they have kind of talked him up, and you look at what he brings, it's very similar to what an Ezekiel Elliott would bring, probably
a few seasons ago, maybe.
Right. So Freeman got hurt within the last week of practice, and that, I think, is something that you want to keep track of. In terms of kind of verifying the injury situation here with Freeman. It's funny because Jerry Jones, in the same breath of talking about how good Freeman has been, he's talking about Super Bowl teams that made it to the Super Bowl with running backs they traded for midseason. That's one of the reasons we don't have a lot of those top 2 guys, because someone else is going to come in here. Now, could either Ezekiel Elliott or Rico Dowdle still work? They obviously could. But man, it's so fragile. I just, there are other names you can pick. And so
it has to be the most fragile running back situation in the NFL. Like, I know we've kind of touched on a few, but if anybody of any running back caliber is cut in the final cut downs here, they could be the Cowboys starting running back in week 1, week 2.
Yeah, and you look at someone like Samaje Perine, I think is certainly in the mix to be the Dallas Cowboys starter. We've talked a lot about Khalil Herbert. He played early against, he played early with Caleb Williams and out there at the same time as DeAndre Swift. Now, Swift had already had a 42-yard reception, so concerns that he's going to lose volume to Herbert probably are unfounded. And, I'm going to continue to float the idea that they're showcasing him for a trade right up until, it's no longer possible when the season's over, when the trade deadline has passed. Our pick column is someone we hadn't discussed, which is a player we like a lot due to his receiving upside. He has been trendy at different times of camp, but Dylan Laube, the name we clicked in round 19.
Yeah. It's I think he's just like, when you're looking at what could happen in this area of the draft, and you're looking at where the valuable touches could come from, even if that is just a couple of receptions in a game. And it may sound ridiculous, but Shawn, there will be points in the season in these best ball lineups too, where, like, with buys, and that you're desperate just to get like anything more than a 0 into the lineup, and that has been the case on certain occasions and some of the teams that we've had a lot of success with. You're just looking to get somebody to get more than 4 points to get you over the hump and get you qualified through to the final weeks. So he's somebody where the pass catching profile is interesting, and an offense as well, where I think it's a relatively fragile running back situation. You know how we were talking about the Cowboys. I think there's lots of parts of that offense that could potentially fit into that fragile category, but I think there could be standalone value early in the third down work, but he could also factor himself in maybe if he has good standing in those situations. So not that I'm expecting huge things, but I think there's a possibility that he gets points on the board. Shawn, you're much more in tune with the college production and that their side of things. What is the upside case, I guess? You know, we looked at Braelon Allen and the upside case, unfortunately, if something was to happen to a Breece Hall. But what would be the kind of high end of outcomes if everything went perfect in this situation for Lowry?
Well, Lowry is someone who I think had 699 receiving yards last year in college. That is really where he thrives. He's got the Rex Burkhead type of athleticism. Alexander Madison, who is the sort of nominal backup, just is not an NFL player. So there is a path there.
Well, he is an NFL player.
He's going to be on an NFL team, it seems
Okay.
like. And yet one of the good arguments for Zamir White, someone who almost made it to us in round 8 and would have been a little bit of an interesting discussion there, is simply that the gap between White and Madison is so significant that maybe you want to take White's workload and sell both the offense and his talent profile, which is a little bit more limited. Having said that, I think making the bet on Lowry in round 19 is a way that gives you probably similar second half of the season upside, and maybe a little bit more because he's such a good receiver if he ended up being out there for some normal running back touches as well. As the season progresses, it's likely that Zamir White either they simply don't have passes to the running back built into the offense because they want to get the ball to Adams, they want to get the ball to Bowers, or it ends up being that those touches go to Lowry, and maybe that opens him up to do some additional things as well. When you can grab the names you can grab after Zamir White. Zamir White's one of those names where I think it's a good play. I think it makes sense. I think he's an interesting guy. I'm rooting for him really hard because he also seems like an amazing dude off the field. It just is barely too early, right? Where you can do so many things with other more explosive players a little bit later. So then Lowry comes back and gives you that high value touch upside as you get deeper into the draft. Colm, I don't think that there's a receiver who is draftable here at this point. I don't know that we need a receiver.
I was going to. I don't think there's any receivers that we can actually draft, but we have 6 running backs, 6 receivers. This will take us to 7 running backs, 6 receivers. I'm still okay with that, but there isn't really. I don't really have a pitch of a receiver that I could give to you that we really should take, other than it'd be nice to have one more. So it feels like we go running back, unless you want to look at tight end, but I think running back again is probably the way to play it.
Yeah, so do you have a preference for Miles Sanders, Royce Freeman, Isaac Guerendo? I think because of the injury, Guerendo has been forgotten about. I still like him, as those other guys, haven't been the priority. Miles Sanders is somebody who I think is being overlooked in a way that.
Yeah, I think we took Sanders. It's actually I didn't. I haven't been drafting Sanders based on, I've been drafting Brooks and sometimes Hubbard. I'm actually astonished that he is still available in the 20th round. We took him at 2007. That, Shawn, is, in terms of like looking for somebody who could potentially cover Nick Chubb's early weeks if you were trying to avoid zeros. Miles Sanders in the 20th round, like not our most favorite player by a long shot, not the most exciting player, but yeah, for him to be going as running back 72 feels pretty wild. And as people can probably tell, I'm becoming aware of this as Shawn has drafted him.
And Colm, one of the fun things here, I want to encourage everybody to click on over to RotoViz. Get yourself that subscription as you prepare for your key drafts in August. Obviously, we're going to have a huge amount of redraft content down the stretch. Also, plenty to cover you in Best Ball. Jake Bowes has a really cool piece on buys and the effect that that will have on your roster. Cool note here, all three of our QBs have different buys. The first overlap in buy at the running back position came with the round 19 and 20 picks, Laube and Sanders. We don't have overlap in buy at receiver. We do not have overlap in buy at tight end. And we're still able to accomplish the things that we were looking for with Caleb Williams and DJ Moore, with Kirk Cousins and Kyle Pitts, with Justin Fields being the nice play unstacked. I really like the way this roster came out.
Yeah, I think it was fun. We did a lot. We moved through some potential hurdles. And so we have Caleb Williams, Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, Kyron Williams, James Conner, Nick Chubb, Braelon Allen, Will Shipley, Dylan Laube, Miles Sanders. Then we have Jamar Chase, DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs, Xavier Worthy, Jamison Williams, Jalen Polk, Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson, our boy Greg Dulcich, and Michael Mayer. Shawn, I think there's a huge amount of upside built into that roster. Obviously, we do have some of the potential running back concerns, with that Chubb pick, but we've kind of filled that in on the back end. But there's teams that I have not drafted a running back until just shortly before Nick Chubb, Shawn, that do not have Kyron Williams and James Conner on it, that are more frail for sure at the running back position. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Really like this team. Got some of our favorite plays on it. And, again, without really pushing it too much, we got the 2 quarterback stacks, just one player with each one, but we get Kirk Cousins with Pitts. We get Caleb Williams along with Moore. And as you pointed out on the Williams pick, we are in a situation where for this team to, go supercharged or supernova towards a championship, we do need those kind of opening players in the first 4 rounds, where Pitts goes in round 3 and Moore goes then in round 4 to hit. Really, we kind of have them paired with that quarterback too, which is a lot of fun. So nice team. Shawn did mention signing up over at RotoViz. You can use that code RBRadio2024 to get yourself a 10% discount to a RotoViz 1-year pass. And also sorry, Shawn, is the site discount still on?
Yeah.
Okay. And the additional site discount that is available when signing up, that 10% code also works with it. So do go over and check that out over at rotoviz.com. Get all the articles and content up on the website, including Shawn's. Get all the tools as well to set you up for your drafts. That is going to do it for this edition of RotoViz Overtime. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at @OverToMarlin. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com. And until next time, have a good one.